The world has never changed faster and will never change slower. Welcome to the We Are Future series, where we get to talk to global thought leaders and industry experts on all things digital, technology and innovation, and how it impacts the way we live, work, act and interact. Now tune in for those candid conversations and be part of creating the future of work.
So I'm very excited to welcome my next guest. Cath Thrupp, in terms of the future of work, has been, I want to say, her career spanned more than 20 years in different industries, including environment, science and engineering. Yet we found ourselves crossing paths, obviously, with the natural alignment with the future of work. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce her. Cath has some really interesting insights because she's both an author and a keynote speaker in this space. And so she's been talking at different events across Australia, I guess helping educate or build some of that understanding and thought leadership around the future of work and what trends she's also seeing and researching about as well. So I really look forward to this conversation. So thank you so much for joining us, Cath. I can't wait to hear what you've been up to and what you've got through in your pipeline at the moment.
But that's my pleasure. Thank you.
No, thank you. And before we get into it, of course, I would love for you to maybe, I know I've introduced you, but I'd love for you to sort of elaborate on some of the things that you're focusing on this year, any kind of initiatives or other things that you've been really working on.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me along, Jen. It's a super interesting topic, the future of work. So I've actually founded over the last 4 years a company called Our New Leaders. And we work a lot with companies in Australia and globally as well, looking at how we support them to set up better for the future of work. So I've been working over the last few years on a few initiatives, and I look forward to sort of talking more about those. But they're sort of related to my book, of course, in helping organisations to set up. My book's called Reset: Preparing Organisations for the Future of Work. And I've also been working on some actual implementation initiatives, mindful of the fact that a lot of organisations will need particular tactics around how they actually practically start setting up for the future of work. So I've actually set up, some teams that are operating under some of the future of work principles that I talk about. So look forward to talking a bit more about those.
So knowing you do have a breadth of industry experience, so it's probably not the right thing to ask you what you've noticed happening in one particular industry. So instead of the work that you're doing, especially because you are working in some of that practical application for business and their workplaces, have you noticed any common themes or common innovations that have really bookmarked what's happening in terms of the future of work?
Look, it's very challenging to kind of, refine that to a short list because there are just so many changes over the last 12 months. So, yeah, I've just tried to think through, what might be the causes of those changes and to sort of come up with a top 3. So my first comment would be around changing demographics in the workplace. And, I think we all know this already and we've seen this, really seeing though the changing demographics pushing a lot of change in the workplace. So, we've obviously got lots of millennials and Gen Zs coming through now, and it's changing the whole way that we operate in workplaces. So that's what kind of the demographic change is one of the big things I've noticed. Mm-hmm. The second thing relates to exponential technology. We all see lots of technological change, but the interesting thing about it is it's all coming together right now. So, for example, we've got 3D printing, we've got AI, we've got VR and AR. Everything is converging right now, and we're starting to see, as a result of all of those technologies coming together, some really significant change in the workplace. So that's, again, I think is just going to increase in the pace of change. And then the other thing that I've been thinking through is related to some of the industries that I'm working with. So I work a lot across engineering and science fields. So in that space, there are some really significant changes that, I've started to see over the last 12 months. And that relates to something that I call coordinated decentralization. So Of course, in areas like water and energy, where we've got some really big infrastructure that a lot of companies manage, whether it be a water treatment plant or a power plant, what's really interesting around the globe is the shift from that big centralized, infrastructure through to quite decentralized infrastructure. And so, for example, a lot of people like to be able to manage in their own homes, their own energy and their own water supply and so forth. So we've seen some of the emerging countries around the world, instead of putting in really expensive infrastructure, they've just jumped straight to having a household infrastructure that's centralized using technology platforms. So it's quite a large challenge, I suspect, for our big established companies to think about shifting from a really costly large infrastructure model to what will be a lot more agile and a lot more decentralized model in the future. So that's, to me, I've started to see that change, and I think it will drive some really, really significant changes in the way those industries operate.
That's very cool. And I love that, I'm listening to these themes, and you talk a little bit about the workforce, so that people element, but also the system. So describing technology exponentially. So I probably want to call that out, mainly because technology has obviously been around for a long time, but it's the pace of change which is determining that reaction that organizations are feeling, and whether they have the agility to even react in as a sustainable manner. And so I'd love to know, and you did touch on these based on the fact that you've noticed these as themes, but if you were to, thinking about the listeners, if these are people who are working in businesses now and do want to understand what they need to start considering, or from a practical point of view, what they can start to do in order to be more future of work ready, so to speak, how do even just these three initiatives change the skill sets, the jobs, the leadership, or even the way we work?
The answer is it changes everything.
Yeah.
So
that's a short answer.
Again, it gets really challenging to, bring it down to just a couple of things, because really those three things change everything about the way we work. But, in terms of little things that people can start adapting right now, it's, we can immediately start updating our position descriptions, for example, because there are different and new skills needing now that we want to bring into the workplace. And an example might be coding, and some of these skills we can start to build into our existing position descriptions, so that any new staff we bring on from here on in, are starting to bring those new skills into the workplace. Obviously, super important to have that really clear vision around, where we're each heading as an organisation, so that you can, help to set yourself up flexibly. But I think also the way that we work is totally changing, and everyone's probably seen this already, but the technology, the fact we are working more remotely, the fact that we are working in more sort of creative hubs, if you like, where people might come together, work on a project, disband, move on, and work on another project. So it's just thinking through for your organisations, putting my hat on in terms of the listeners, for them to think through how the way that people want to work and need to work on dynamic projects will lead to changes in the way their organisation is structured. An example might be, starting to think of the sorts of projects that you might want to bring people together on in terms of different skill sets. So, how do we create kind of an ecosystem or a series of small ecosystems across an organisation that come together to work on specific projects? So I'm just trying to think, what will make this a really easy for our listeners to implement. A few other things might be what we're measuring. We've, I guess, traditionally come from economic measures, But now we're really moving into sort of more benefit corporation approach. We're needing to bring in other metrics around how we might measure our business. So that might be something else that people would start thinking about, if they want to measure other attributes of their business around, the impact that your business is making in the industry that you're in, or the customer service metrics, or the employee experience metrics. What are those measures that are really going to be really important to our companies, and how do we start to sort of embed them in our day-to-day business and what we're measuring? So they're probably just a few of the, little things that people can start to do, obviously with a vision in mind of where they want their organisation to be in, 5, 10, 20 years' time.
Yeah, that's great. And I'd love to know a little bit more about if you've had any case studies or any actual examples of where you've seen that done successfully in an organisation. Have you, as part of your research or as part of what you've been involved in?
Yeah, look, I think around the world, there certainly are a lot of organisations that are working this way. And, people would be familiar with the big organisations like Google and Apple and others, and the more creative and flexible way that they're working in. Most recently, thinking of an engineering and science space that I've been working in, the way that we've made that work is to bring together quite diverse thinkers from across a range of different workplaces. And I'm finding that diversity of thinking is very important when you're bringing together, a small group of, say, 15 people to work on a project. So we have actually looked at bringing those 15 people from different walks of life, with different experiences, but all with a particular specialist skill that they bring to the table that, that allows them to then work as part of the team to add value to that team in the delivery of a project. And then other things that we've implemented with that team has been automation, for example. So we've looked at, what are we trying to achieve as a project team, and what can be actually automated? So, people are using Python coding quite a lot at the moment to look at automating particularly repetitive tasks. And we've been able to really reduce the time it takes to deliver projects. We do a little bit of things like flood modelling, for example. A lot of that can start to be automated now with just, an expert overseeing the outputs to make sure that it makes sense. So that's probably some of the sorts of things that we're working on. I'm also obviously coming to that space, the AR and VR. So we've been doing a lot of work thinking about how do we display the information in a different way, particularly for investors. If people are putting money towards an engineering and scientific firm to do work, they want to know what they're investing in. And, traditionally it's been quite hard to show people that, we might have had some pictures of what it could look like. But now we can actually show them, we could get them to put a 3D headset on, and we can take them for a walkthrough of what that project will look like once it's been constructed.
Powerful
and
stuff.
It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So that's some examples.
Yeah, that's great. And probably another thing I'd like to call out, and I would love to know what you've seen in this arena as well, is I guess traditionally when we look at building or creating these diverse thinkers or teams, we look internally into our organization. So we look at the talent we have, and based on all the things that you said so far in terms of the pace of change, technology, it's not realistic to think that all the time we're going to get that level of diversity that's required just from, the current workforce that organizations might have. And so I guess this is probably a two-point part question. Is one, in terms of getting those teams or those groups together to work on a project, have you seen that it's become a balance between internal, external, or a combination of the two? And if so, how does an organization or a leader look to recruit that or find that, based on the fact that, it might require expertise that's outside what their demographic or workforce currently is?
You are absolutely right. And that example that I gave, we had a mix of internal and external. So predominantly it was external. So we're using gig workers quite a lot now. And so we're able to use either an agency contract or, perhaps even a contract with universities, which we're working a lot with as well at the moment. So it's a matter of, when you're building a team, you think about the project, you think about your dream team and the skills that you'd need to be able to deliver that project. And then I like to look out, whether it be LinkedIn or actually putting an ad up on LinkedIn or other places, look out to the world basically and see who would you like to be working on that project with you, and just literally approach them. It doesn't matter if they're in another country, or if they've got the skill and they're kind of cutting edge in terms of what they're doing and you want them on your team. Well, people are open to that now. So it's definitely bringing that diversity of skills together. And I also think to be able to do that in an adaptable way. So, we would use lots of different types of contract types, for example, whether it be agency contract or in some cases as a consulting contract, or sometimes just on an hourly basis, you have people come in and provide expert opinion on particular topics. As well as that, we're doing a lot of work with universities where we actually have university students apply for particular projects that we're working on, and they would actually then come and sit in the workplace and help to deliver a project, which gives you access to their lecturers, the university, and all of their resources, as well as the students' input and time. So yeah, lots of different ways that could work, and I agree with you. I think that it's different for every project, for every organisation, and you need to have that flexibility to be able to access everyone that's out in the marketplace right now.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing in some of those examples, they're really just leveraging not just only people but systems, and not thinking so insular in terms of just what's there. And it's really nice to hear, or I guess a relief to hear, that there are so many people and organisations that have an appetite for this thing as well, because it does make it a really exciting and as you said, an accessible group of talent we maybe never considered or had the opportunity to consider before.
Absolutely.
You used a term, and I'm not sure if it's something that's used everywhere, so I'd love for you to elaborate on it a little bit more. Gig worker. So that's obviously not something that's a traditional employee by any means, but for someone who might have heard that for the first time in this episode, how do you define that? What is that? Who is that?
Yeah, look, gig workers, I think it's probably just one of those terms that's been emerging around the world. I know certainly in the US and a few other countries, they're using that term quite often, but we probably are not using it so much here in Australia yet. Essentially, it means that you have access to a pool of contractors, that come and go depending on peak demands. So if, let's just say I was a gig worker, that would mean that I wasn't committed to any particular company, but that I worked for a diverse range of companies, and that I organised myself, on a work platform of some sort. And Uber gives you probably a little bit of an example of what that would look like. A lot of gig workers are working for organisations like Uber, where they might do a couple of days a week for Uber, then they might do a couple of days a week for another organisation. So it's just a term for that, really. A gig worker is someone who's doing a little bit of a lot of different things rather than just a full-time permanent standard, workplace contract.
Great. And lastly, Cath, I would love to know what you're most excited about, either personally with what you've got on your plate this year, or just in general, what you're most excited to see in terms of innovations, changes in the space of future of work. Is there anything in particular that's really got you excited?
Look, I am very optimistic about the future and quite excited about lots of different aspects of the future. So I call myself a realistic optimist, right? Because,
a realistic optimist. I like that.
I kind of love everything that the future's got to offer, and acknowledge that there'll be, some challenges along the way for organisations to adapt and learn and improve. But yeah, look, I'm most excited about a couple of things. And one is the emergence of benefit corporations. So again, I'm not sure if that's a term that everyone's familiar with, but in the US, for example, benefit corporations are a particular type of corporation that's recognised in law. And here in Australia, they've been looking to amend our corporations legislation to also be able to have benefit corporations here. And what that really means is that you set your corporation up around a range of different drivers, not just economic. So, you know, benefit corporations often have other impact metrics that are equally important to the board and to their organisation as economics are. So, for example, you know, your organisation might stand for making an impact in climate change, let's say, and so that then becomes a metric, and you're actually embedding that in the way that you do business. And I think, you know, that type of corporation starts to drive change in terms of, you know, moving the focus from just economic, which I think is quite exciting, you know, for the future and where that might lead. I think that automation for me is another really exciting thing, because it's never made sense to me that we have all these incredibly smart people who are sitting in the corner doing repetitive tasks, you know, that it's not kind of the best use of their brain. And so I'm very excited that we can just automate all the repetitive stuff and have people, you know, adding value at a higher level than we've ever been able to before.
Yeah.
And so that's exciting. I love the connection potential at the moment as well across the globe. You know, I kind of feel that with technology now, it gives us the ability to connect with other like-minded leaders across the world in a way that we've never been able to before. And with that can drive great change and momentum, because you can look across the globe and literally work with anyone who has a similar mindset and work for change, you know, and take on some of these complex challenges that we're dealing with in the workplace today. So I'm quite excited. I'm pretty excited too about what all this means for, you know, smart cities and how we start to design everything, not just the workplace, but also the cities and the infrastructure. And yeah, look, the opportunities, there are so many in this day and age, and it's a very exciting time, I think.
Yeah, that's really great. And I love, and I mean, even for me personally, even just being involved in this podcast has allowed me to hear from people that I would never have dreamed of hearing from, and people are so giving of their time and adding value and helping each other. That's definitely a trend that I've become excited about as well. It's just that constant collaboration or connection that we're trying to find with each other, and it's not competition anymore, is it? It's more like, absolutely, okay, well, what can we do together in order to make something that's exponential? And I love that word, because it absolutely does feel like we are kicking greater goals just purely by bringing the best minds together on projects and solving problems.
Totally agree. Yeah, I'm very excited by, I feel as though collective, it's like having an enormous team that we can work together with across the globe, you know, to kind of really ramp up our effectiveness and what we can get done in the world. And yeah, I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, very great. Well, Cath, lastly, I'd love if anyone wanted to get in touch with you, what are the best channels of communication or linking up with you?
Yeah, look, I love to have great conversations. I enjoy a good coffee. If anyone wants to, you know, grab a coffee and, you know, start talking through some future of work strategies. Best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn, and I'm at Cath Thrupp. So feel free to connect with me, and I'll look forward to catching up a bit more in the future.
Great. And again, thanks so much for your time, Cath. We really appreciate it. For anyone that wants to connect with Cath, let us know. We can link you up either via LinkedIn, through other means. Again, it's all about getting the collective consciousness around future of work and making sure that we are able to connect and help each other reach their full potential. So if that hasn't taught us anything in this episode, that's the one takeaway that I would suggest that you take away. So again, thanks, Cath, for your time. I know it's very valuable, so we really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Jen, for your time too, and to the audience. Look forward to catching up soon.
Great, thank you.
And that wraps up another insightful conversation about the future of work. And now we want to hear from you. What was the biggest takeaway from this conversation? Make sure you share your learnings on LinkedIn and also tag our guest speakers. And of course, if you or somebody you know has some more interesting take on the future of work, send us an email to contact@wearefuture.com. Until next time, and keep creating the future of work.